And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Infra Man, Allison Cook, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so very much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have Red Pill Junkie.
Buenas noches.
Super Infra Man, also known as Saxon.
Hello.
And Chris Ernst.
Hello, everybody.
And we're going to do a listener stories show because we haven't done one of these in a while. And I was looking through my emails and realizing I haven't read through some of these and I haven't answered people because I suck at answering emails because I see them and I go, I got to answer that later. And then I completely forget about it.
That looks awesome. That's what I do too. I see an email. Oh, great. Okay, awesome. And then I don't ever look at it again.
This looks really interesting. I want to actually sit and read this later, and then it goes out of mind because then it gets filled with 10 other emails above it. So, yeah. Also, I should mention we have a Discord. I don't know. I don't mention that too much, but it's slowly getting more active. You can find links to all the stuff we have at wheretheroadgo.com. And there's a Discord, there's a Facebook page. The Facebook page seems to be the most active, or the group, the Facebook group. Obviously, there's a Facebook page, there's a Twitter, there's other stuff. All the connections are on there, obviously, there's a YouTube and things. And if you want to submit a story, if you have a story you'd like to talk to, that would like us to discuss on the air, or if you want to come on and talk about your experiences, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com is where you want to go. And also, while you're there, become a patron, too, if you go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. That helps us out greatly. And you get extra stuff almost every show. So sometimes the patron stuff is longer than the actual show because there's no restrictions, and I can just keep talking to people.
I got to tell you, as someone who's a Patreon first before I became a little bit more close to people working on the show, I really enjoy it. And, if you appreciate Where Did the Road Go, you appreciate these things that keep our minds open in the interesting times that we live in. It is a good thing to throw $1 or $2 or whatever you can afford. It doesn't have to be a lot to support. I call it arts, but it's beyond the arts because we're talking about all kinds of topics here. But
true.
If you can do it, please do it because you'll get a lot out of it. And if we can't support things like this, then I always go back to that Churchill comment about, if we don't have the arts, why are we fighting wars? Mm-hmm. What's the point of living if we don't open our minds up to ideas and be challenged by what's out there?
Well said. True, man.
All right, so we're going to start this listener story show off with 2 stories about strange audio. And this one says, I have had many audio experiences, but have selected 3 that scored high on my strangeness scale. Account 1. Sometime during the 1980s, and I was about 10 or 11 years old, my mother had befriended a few of the elderly widows in the neighborhood, and I would help them by cutting their lawns, picking up groceries, errands, and such. Beyond chores, she would also spend time visiting each one on a weekly basis. I was never forced to go with her, but on visits would often would because it would turn out that the elders had some great stories about history, culture, and even ghosts. Mm-hmm. This summer day, we visited a woman named Joyce. When we arrived, she served tea and explained she thought it would be fun to record ourselves reading poetry. She had a stack of books, tape recorder, and a new pack of cassette tapes. We selected our poems, and while she opened the cassette tape and set up the recorder, we all read a poem and decided to listen before recording anymore, so she pushed rewind. When she pushed play, a recording of a choir singing was heard. We all looked at each other in surprise, and I remember my mother saying it was a brand new tape. and they fast-forwarded to find nothing, and also flipped it over to find nothing. Silence except for the few minutes of the choir singing. Account 2, I was in my mid-20s, and my children and I had moved back in with my mother. It was evening, and we were sitting in the living room talking while the boys were playing Hot Wheels on the coffee table. I don't recall exactly what was said, but we were discussing my ex. My mother made a comment about him, and suddenly a very loud male voice said, "You're damn straight he is." And it sounded like someone speaking on a CB radio. The boys jumped up excited and even ran over to the television, but it wasn't turned on. Nothing was on. Of course, my mother said it proved she was right in her opinion of my ex. And account 3, this was recent, like maybe 2019-ish. I was in the middle of sexual activity when suddenly loud music came on. It was quite startling, and when we finally investigated, we found my husband's phone had randomly started up his Pandora app. The song playing was Thinking of You by Tool. Thoughts, everyone?
Well,
The
the
last-
first
go
one.
ahead.
The first episode seems to be the strangest.
Yeah.
You know, the choir music that was recorded with these elder women. That seems to be analogous of EVPs, right? Electronic voice phenomena.
Right.
Things that are, tracked, or there are recorded or detected, I guess is the word I'm looking for, by instruments. And by the way, that seems to be kind of like, I don't know if it's, I'm not that knowledgeable, but I feel that it's getting lost with the advent of digital technology. This is something that was more prevalent with analog technology, white noise, and all that. The second one, I don't know if you guys. It reminded me, made me think about that passage in, I want to say, I don't know if it was Communion of Transformation, one of Whitley Strieber's books, in which he says that he started to get, he engaged into some kind of dialogue with a voice that was coming from his stereo, a stereo system that was connected. It was kept at the famous New York cabin where all these events supposedly transpired. And I think at one point the voice at the end of this dialogue said something to the effect of, "I know more about you now," or something like that. And the third one, well, that's I don't know if that feels like a bona fide synchronicity, something that it's interesting, but it's something that I don't feel that is that out of the ordinary, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think you're right, though. The third one, it actually did pop out at me thinking about essentially Kundalini energy and its connection to electricity. Now, of course, if she wasn't experiencing anything that she felt, I mean, I don't know, but there definitely is a correlation between sexual activity, Kundalini activation, and
Right.
electrical energy. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Right.
So
I didn't even think about that. Well, that is interesting. I wish I knew what the choir was singing in the first event.
Yeah.
Y'all, this is a story I don't tell it very often. This was just a dream. But, Red Pill, you and I were talking about how I have a lot of Christian imagery built into,
Yes.
I had a dream where, about kind of like post-apocalyptic things and stuff like that I used to love when I was a kid. And the phone rang, and it was supposed to be God on the other side, So I answered the phone. I know.
you better get that.
Right. Yeah. But the voice was a choir talking.
Huh.
And, in unison. So you heard like 1,000 voices at once, like, saying whatever it wanted you to hear. So I would be really interested to know if it was just like choir music, or if it was a particular song or something like that might have meant something to them. And it may not have meant anything to the listener that sent the story in, but it may have been familiar to one of the other elders that were there in the immediate area.
Yeah.
The second one, the CV kind of sound, makes me think of that electronic voices you hear sometimes.
Yes.
Seriah, you and I both talked about that, where you hear what I'm impressed by is how clear it was.
Mm-hmm.
When I normally hear of those experiences, it's like in another room, like a radio is playing or something, and you can't quite make out what's being said, but you recognize that there is a voice saying something or a conversation happening. I would love to know if that sounded like it was a response to, a comment about the ex.
Right.
Because that's the implication, but I want to know what they said about the ex, probably, that spurred on the, you damn, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With the ex saying, effing A!
Right.
Also, do you remember, also reminds me of Betty Anderson, right? When she was put under hypnosis, right? And then suddenly she seems to have gotten into some sort of trance in which she began to, channel, I guess is the only word we have, these entities. I don't know if it was Kuasga or another one. So it's some kind of presence of entity that was interacting with the researchers. And at one point, during this trance, they seem to have gotten into some sort of interference that had been to be caused by a trucker using a CB radio. Which seems like, how is it possible that you have this kind of like almost like a spiritual possession and you get interference from something as lowly and as primitive as CB radio?
Because it's all electromagnetic.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's obviously. Yeah, John Keel will jump right into that conclusion.
Well, that idea of the choir sound too isn't specific only to Christianity. There are these the explanations within Vedic cosmology. The idea of Naad, which is Naad, which is a sort of primordial sound, like. And very similar, in many ways to the metaphor, or however you want to interpret it, of speaking. The idea of God spoke and there was creation, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So this idea of like sound being something that is, and particularly the idea of a choir too. I've heard it from several sort of, I've heard anecdotes from several really obscure holy men in India that talk about, one of the first things that people start to experience when they are developing essentially psi abilities as part of yoga that allow them to perceive, the subtle plane, what they would call it. That the first thing you hear is what is essentially this sound that sounds like a choir.
Right.
And so that's, whether or not, I think it's very possible for that, to be involved with this EVP. If we're talking about EVP, if we're talking about something that is, essentially imprinted upon the tape itself from other subtle means, I am not surprised that a choir was heard. I'm not,
I wish that Josh were here to enlighten us about characteristics of, choir singing and how, the whole thing about harmonics and different kind of voices, like getting in sync and chanting. I think that is not that, that was something that kind of like appeared in medieval times, but it didn't appear before. I'm not sure about that, but the idea of having voices going into this kind of like harmonics
The harmonics, yeah, and octaves too, especially, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there. Yeah. I mean, how do we know that these religious mystics didn't go into some sort of trance, and they go and listen to this and say, "Oh my God, maybe we can try to reproduce that," and that's the origin of, Gregorian chants, choir chants, and that's why it's like chicken
absolutely.
of the egg scenario, right?
I totally hear what you're saying. It's similar to that whole, Blake. What is it? Blake seeing the sun, and it's like a golden guinea, but it's also, what is he like? He said like a million angels screaming the divine name over and over, or something. Right. There's like some depiction that Blake uses of that. Yeah.
I remember having, and I can't remember exactly what it was. There was a cassette tape I know a friend of mine had, and when we flipped it over, there was something on there. There was a song on there that couldn't possibly have been on there, and for the life of me, I cannot remember exactly what it was. But the only other thing that comes to mind is the time I was working with some time-lapse footage, and I had other weird stuff going on in the house at the time, like the fire alarm weirdly going off, and then some weird orbs and stuff. And when I went back to check the time-lapse footage, I played it, and it played at normal speed with audio, which didn't exist. And I went, what?
Oh.
And I stopped it, and I played it again, and then it was the time-lapse footage. And I went, well, that was certainly impossible. Okay.
Wow.
But I wish
that was some sort of weird glitch that your camera. Now that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
No, none of it makes sense. Because it wasn't recorded like that. That footage didn't exist anywhere, and the time lapse didn't record with audio.
Yeah.
So it's like
even if time lapse did record with audio, it wouldn't sound like, because you're taking like one frame every minute or however you set it.
Right. Yeah.
It wouldn't sound like real time audio. That's very interesting.
So, I mean, that was definitely a weird night. I wish I could remember the other thing with the cassette tape, though. I'm pretty sure I have it written down somewhere, and I know I've talked about it before, but right now it's not. The details are not coming to mind. There's just these weird things with reality sometimes, almost like you're slipping, into something else.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems like with them, they recorded that, and that stayed on there, which definitely sounds more like an EVP. And I mean, to me, EVPs may very possibly be put on this stuff by us, like unintentionally, unconsciously with psi, rather than a spirit. So, who knows where that really came from?
Right.
So, all right. So let's go to the next story on weird music. This one's really cool. All right. Well, the first one was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
So this is from David. He says, I heard the listener's story about the strange music in the Austrian forests in the place where Napoleon had camped. It brought to mind an experience I had roughly 18 years ago. I was visiting my family in south central Iowa in early November. On a bright, sunny, unseasonably warm afternoon, I drove a few miles south of town to the favored old haunt of my youth, a shallow sand-bottomed creek that ran between cornfields, through riverbeds that were steep and tall, a narrow ribbon of tree-trimmed wilderness in a sea of cropland. It had been many years since I'd had an opportunity to revisit this place that had served as my sanctuary of sorts as I was growing up, so there was somewhat a sense of homecoming in that moment. I drove down the dusty gravel road to park on the shoulder near the bridge. I believe I could hear it as soon as I opened the car door. A sublime celestial music completely enveloped me. It was remarkable. I was disoriented as I tried to figure out where such wondrous music could be coming from. It was loud, though not unpleasantly so, and exceptionally clear. There was no question that it was actually happening and that I was hearing it with my ears, and yet I could not discern any directionality, as if it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. My rational mind puzzled over whether it was possible that any of the nearest homes or farms could be the source of the music, but upon careful consideration, that seemed exceedingly unlikely. There were a couple of farms or homes less than a half of a mile from the creek, basically perched just above the edge of the floodplain, but it just didn't make sense. For one thing, we're talking about rural Iowa here. So first of all, the choice of music is clearly quite suspect. Second of all, in order to even begin to produce music at that level of quality and at that volume over that distance, we'd be talking about the caliber of a sound system you'd need for something like a stadium concert. Not too likely in those parts. But even if such a sound system actually was the source, there would be a discernible direction that it would be coming from, and such was not the case. In addition, when music travels from a distance, it seems like there's always some distortion or an echo or something of that sort. There was none of that. It was absolutely perfect. Probably the closest comparison would be to listening to music in an acoustically engineered music hall, or better yet, the living room of a serious audiophile. With no explanation for this otherworldly music in the middle of Iowa corn country, my own behavior may seem a little odd in retrospect. I continued my outing as I had planned. I was strongly affected by the music, although I stayed completely conscious, but I proceeded as normal to put on my rubber boots and navigate down the steep river embankment to get down into the water. Once I had entered the clear, wide, shallow creek, I proceeded to wade downstream. Now back to the question of acoustics. To retrace my path, I had gotten out of my car, walked along the shoulder to the bridge abutment, ducked under the modern concrete bridge, because under the bridge there's no brush or weeds, making it a lot easier to descend the embankment, descended the slope under the bridge, entered the creek, which is probably 30 feet below the bridge, and walked out from under the bridge. In all of that moving around, vertically and beneath a very large and solid structure, there was no change at all in the volume, pitch, sense of non-directionality, or any other quality in the music. It was not changed or distorted in any way, which would normally occur when you're hearing a distant sound source. Here's the next strange thing. After I had waited perhaps a couple hundred yards, I became aware that I could no longer hear the music. Given the high strangeness of the music and how all-encompassing it felt, like total immersion, for lack of a better expression, not to mention the volume, you'd think I would have really noticed when it stopped, but I didn't. I only became aware at some point that I wasn't hearing it anymore. It might sound like an insignificant detail, but I think it could be a clue of some kind. When it was over, it was really over. Like suddenly it was back to just ordinary humdrum everyday reality, and I recall I felt a little bereft. The feeling of being immersed in that mysterious music was both exquisite and exalted, and when it abruptly ended, I felt a little like falling out of paradise. I wondered if I had failed a test of some kind, like if I had somehow known what to do or how to respond, something quite profound would have been revealed to me. I can relate to the siren song aspect referred to by the Austrian forest listener story, but in my case, there was no physical direction I could move towards to get closer to the source. If there had been, I'm sure I would have gone that way. There was certainly no fear to hold me back, and although the adjective enchanting had not occurred to me before, I think that would be a fairly accurate way to describe what I heard. If I had to estimate the clock time that transpired, I would guess it was 8 to 10 minutes. I wasn't moving the whole time. Some of the time I was standing there both amazed and bewildered. While it was happening, there was a feeling of timelessness. But having said that, I never lost contact with consensus reality.
Definite Oz factor there.
Right. I mean, first of all, sir or madam, you know how to write.
I was going to say the same thing too.
You know how to paint a picture in one's mind. Kudos to you.
That would be David. Yes.
All right. Second of all, the first thing, one of the things that came to mind is, well, the famous story of the Pascagoula abduction in 1973. And I remember listening to this interview on Adam Gorightly's podcast, Untamed Dimensions, with Alan Greenfield, when he told Adam that Pascagoula means literally singing river. So, this idea of why do they call the natives, why do they call this river, singing, Is it because it was very, the water was very strong or something, or is it because there are instances in which you enter into some sort of altered state of consciousness in which you detect some kind of audible phenomena.
Yeah.
And the other thing that reminds me is something that I read in the blog of this live journal of this person that is a friend of Mike Cleland, our friend who wrote The Messengers, and also, he still keeps his Hidden Experience blog, his experiences about owls and weird phenomena. And this person who went by the pen name of Lucretia Hart, this also has a good share of very weird experiences of her own. One of them involved something that was akin to some kind of like, near-death experience. And I think that she recalled how she felt transported to this kind of heavenly realm in which there were people or entities there in this wonderful level of existence, and she could see like this wonderful music that was emanating from these entities, almost like back what we were saying previously with the previous listener story, kind of like a heavenly choir. And what's interesting about that story is that at one point Lucretia felt compelled to interact and say something, and it was like, oh wow, nice music. But when she opened her mouth and said something, the sound was so grotesque and so loud and so cacophonous that all the other entities stopped singing and just turned and looked at her. And she felt this horrible embarrassment, like, oh my God, it's like, you interrupted this wonderful concert by farting or something,
Wow. Yeah.
So, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that idea of failing the test. Well, I don't know. I mean, who knows? Maybe the listener recalled feeling this sense of homecoming, right? So this place had a special meaning.
Well, maybe too, they were more sensitive to stuff because this place had a special meaning,
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course we're only getting a sliver of the thing, right? I mean, we don't know what happened before or after. Something that would say, oh, you see, it like because 5 days later this happened, and maybe this is connected, or maybe it's because these were things that were happening in your life, like, I don't know, some kind of like heartbreak or work problems, family problems, and so we don't know. But nevertheless, I mean, fascinating.
I always think too, or it makes me think too, particularly that the anecdote you were talking about, RPJ, of the, I think it's sort of the quintessential explanation or description that Terence McKenna gives of his DMT experience, or his first DMT experience with the Tykes, the self-transforming machine elves, where it really ended with essentially him feeling like they were telling him to create with sound, with his mouth. Right. And I find that very interesting. This is another, this is another story about somebody that, at this time they were using an athenogen, and they were using a substance, but they break through to the other side of something, and they have this interaction where, they are being told that there's this importance, this primal importance to creation with sound. I'm not surprised that we hear more and more of this into these different iterations that are coming forth. It is really interesting.
Right. And
go ahead,
Rick.
And also the idea that when people who participate in ayahuasca ceremonies, they often tell how they feel compelled to sing, right?
Yes.
And even Dennis McKenna said, "Oh, I don't sing. I can't carry a tune. I'm terrible." But when you are under the influence of these compounds, you sing. And there is obviously the lore about these people who have this tradition of using these powerful herbal medicines. Is that people think that it is the chemical compound, the one that it has some kind of effect on the person. Even if you think of it as medicines, some kind of like beneficial effect on the organism. But when you speak to the ayahuasqueros, to the shamans, they say no. The power or the healing doesn't come from the plant. The healing comes from the music. The healing comes from the Icaros, or the songs that are inspired by the medicine. And when you sing the song, when you participate in the singing, it's when the healing happens. And maybe the test that was failed, and this is me talking out of my ass here, guys, maybe is that this person should have tried to like maybe hum or try to reproduce the sound, maybe participate instead of just being like a passive observer.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, or maybe there just wasn't a test. It just felt like that you needed to respond to something because, I mean, we normally think that these things happen and want a response. But go ahead. Go ahead, Saxon.
Yeah. I was actually I had two thoughts. One of them was very similar to what you just said. Like, well, it could be an event that was passing through or passing by. But, one connection I wanted to throw out there, because we were talking about Pascagoula a couple weeks ago, and like people going fishing and things like that too. This is another one where I wish Joshua Cutchin had a few moments, because it reminds me a little bit of also the trappings of like a fairy tale, particularly of the Fae. Like, I'm hearing this music that is penetrating and everywhere. Are you moving into that realm? And of course, that is always obviously that these are all just different names for the same thing. But going back to the music and the sound, we've talked about language a little bit, and how I think language defines how we perceive reality, because I think it shapes the way we can form things in our brains and what have you. But the connection between like magic and names and sound and reality coming back around together, especially if you're working with something like Chris mentioned earlier with Nod, there's something there. And, we talked about like, if you can break your definition of reality, I think that's probably what opens you up a little bit more to seeing beyond, being open to more experiences. And it sounds like the listener was already open to these things, but I don't have a point in there. I just have the connection between there, but it's very compelling to me.
Yeah.
So, music, first of all, is hardwired into our brains.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's definitely something to our consciousness and the effect music has on us. I remember one time when I was sitting up at the edge of the Potter's Field on the cliff overlooking Seneca Lake, and I started humming the end of Fate's Warning's Epitaph, and it started coming back to me on the wind.
Yep.
And I sat there just going, "This isn't happening," and I'm like, "Nope, that's really distinct."
Yeah.
And, it was just one of those, even when it was happening, it didn't feel real, because that doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
Sorry, let me throw this out there to you. Music gets outside of the way we define words, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
So are you breaking some of that effect that language has, getting out of that mold with it?
Right.
So it communicates better. I don't know. I'm grasping at something there.
I think you are because, for example, I'm a non-native English speaking person here, right? I learned English as a second language, but it's interesting how in places like Mexico, there are people who have a really strong connection with songs that they don't really understand the lyrics. Like the lyrics for them is just total gibberish.
Right.
It's only afterwards, maybe if you like apply some effort in which you can try to learn what the lyrics actually are trying to say. But sometimes it's totally, okay, cool. But that's not important because the song in itself and the sound of the voice, regardless of the actual meaning of the words, like you said, transcend the actual, I don't know, the message of the person doing the singing.
Oh, definitely. I definitely think so.
And there's so much metal that proves that point.
Yeah.
Where you just can't understand a word, but it really connects with you.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing is, one of the things we see in some of these ancient structures and stuff is the way they worked with sound in ways that we don't understand, where there may have been some level of sound technology. That might have been one of the things that ancient cultures, whether we're talking prehistoric ancient cultures or even more modern ancient cultures, had a concept of how sound works with us that we just have lost.
Yeah, well, that was something that people are saying quite a bit. I don't know if there's any actual physical evidence. There might be, that a lot of the mystery schools in Greece, that a lot of what the structures that these people would descend into, beyond having sort of essentially being this immersive theatrical environment, and you're inhaling all this psychedelic smoke, that they had these very specific ways that they were built so that you would hear sound in a specific way. And I think some of them were just so you could hear sound in a spooky way, but then there were some, I think that it was, there was something resonant to it. And there's some people that think that's true about, you're supposed to go lie down and sleep in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid.
And the same with the hypogeum in Malta.
Hypogeum, exactly. Yep.
I remember the first time I used a Tibetan singing bowl, and not, one that I just found at like a knick-knack shop or anything, but one that was a couple 100 years old that was in a museum collection. They let me touch it for a second. And to feel the sound, didn't even sound like it was coming from the bowl. It sounded like it was in the whole room. But at the same time, you also felt the sound through your entire body and the vibration through your body. So I have no doubt, like you're talking about some of those mystery schools, I'm sure it was, that very visceral experience with that. And then, if you can replicate, let's say not replicate, create that sound with a small device like that, then you think about the King's Chamber, something that's the size of the Great Pyramid. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
So, his experience here, this seems like it was almost, it definitely had spiritual connotations, whatever it was.
For sure.
And I wonder what the long-term effects were even unconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it may be an initiation that is something that I believe it was David, has had continued just openness in his life and things like that. It may not have been an acute awakening, but just a general, things are going to happen now.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of sound technology, that are you all familiar with the sort of recent uncovering of the 25th page of the CIA report on the Monroe Institute's Hemi-Sync?
No.
Yeah,
program?
I've heard something about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So to sort of give a little backstory on this, so if people aren't familiar with what the Monroe Institute is, there's this guy, Robert Monroe, who became very notable for being the first person who was sort of popularizing in the West out-of-body experiences and astral projection. And there's an institute that he has, which I believe is in Virginia now. And it still is going on. They still have these. But essentially what happened is, I believe it was in the 50s or 60s, maybe the 60s, he came up with this program called Hemi-Sync. And it's essentially this program of 7 different lessons that you go through that are a combination of essentially binaural beats, like early binaural beats, where you're he called the technology Hemi-Sync, where you're creating a particular frequency in the brain by using 2 alternating frequencies, that the difference between the 2 creates one in the brain. And, these are different things like delta, theta frequencies that have different associations with different sort of states of consciousness, particularly going into the dream state. And so what this program does is that it's essentially guided meditation. You used to get it on tape and you would listen to it as you would go to sleep. And they have you doing stuff which is, it's essentially visualization. There's some very interesting, I don't know if they knew this, but it's tantric throat tuning, where you're essentially doing like something like nod work, where you're dealing with sound. You're trying to tune yourself to a particular frequency. And then a lot of different visualization. But anyway, the next part of this story is that at some point the CIA got interested in this, of course. And so somebody wrote this report. It's a 30-page report talking about the Hemi-Sync experience and what it could possibly do to ostensibly develop psychic spies. And the result of the report, and you can read this, I think there was a Vice article recently. So if you just, look for this, it's very easy to find out there on the web. The result was they found that if you use this Hemi-Sync experience, particularly with the idea of developing these sort of psychic powers, it is more effective and faster than any sort of yogic tantric exercise that they tried before. This, again, leads you to be like, oh, so I want to hear about these, experiments you did. But and they go into this really wild stuff too. Like the guy who wrote it, essentially talking about the monad, like this, the singularity of consciousness that you're sort of tapping into when you are able to break through using this Hemi-Sync. And it's pretty wild stuff. I mean, especially for CIA. And for the longest time, there was this one page that was missing from it. And then apparently this reporter from Vice recently got that original page and the original report from the Monroe Institute. So long story short, there's this, if people are interested in it, anybody, any listeners, there's quite a bit more, there's a whole article on this and you can read the 30-page report. And it's pretty interesting stuff. Not only, from the point of view of Hemi-Sync and what Monroe was doing, but from the point of, CIA shenanigans too.
Huh.
Yeah. I just pulled the article up. It's How to Escape the Confines of Time and Space According to the CIA.
There you
February
go.
16. Yep. February 16, 2021 on Vice's motherboard.
Yeah.
And it was also on TikTok, apparently, a little bit, of all things.
Fantastic. I would expect nothing less from 2021.
Right.
Breaking news on TikTok.
I played with some of those binaural beat stuff at one point. There were some good apps early on when the iPhone was a little bit more in the Wild West of the world.
Yeah.
And you could kind of like program your own, pick your music and all those kinds of things and layer them over each other.
Yeah.
And I could create an experience in there that was fairly similar to what I felt using the singing bowl.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was nice. It was the only time I ever got that shock feeling in my fingertips or in my toes.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably had that experience maybe twice, but it was with that. I wish I'd stay committed to those things.
I have a bunch of the binaural beats actually on my phone that occasionally I'll use when I meditate, and they definitely help. But it was interesting when I was first looking into that stuff. Like someone asked me about it, I'm like, I don't really know much about this. And like there were all these news reports about how this was a new drug that kids were doing.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's like, they're listening to these binaural beats and it's going to harm them and all this other stuff. And they would
use some sound to get high.
Exactly. They had and they had a few, which what they were is they'd be actual binaural beats, and then at some point they would just give you this really like loud, obnoxious noise. And it would move some kids to tears because they'd have it up loud and they'd be listening and it would get them all relaxed. And then suddenly it was like feedback and noise and they'd be like crying and screaming.
Horrible Rick-rolling.
Oh my gosh.
So
yeah, that would be the worst. I mean, I use that. I use, Hemi-Sync stuff to meditate too. And I can't imagine that would really suck.
Yeah.
And some kids just using the normal binaural beats, it was very impactful for them, and other people it did absolutely nothing for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, it's obvious that definitely sound has an important role to play into getting people into altered states of consciousness, and I can't help thinking now how maybe there was something someone wanted to tell us when they slipped in this very absurd tidbit of information in this very controversial and infamous TV show UFO Cover Up Live.
Yeah.
When they told us that aliens not only they love strawberry ice cream, but they also fancy Tibetan throat singing.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
So maybe there's something to that. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next story, which doesn't have to do about music. Okay. So this one comes from Justin, and he says, for a long time, I've been one of those people who would say, nothing really weird has ever happened to me. But I was talking with a coworker, and the subject came up, and it led me to think of 3 stories that I guess I must have repressed, or maybe something else is at play. The one happened after that conversation. The first was when I was a pizza delivery driver. Just after high school, long before inexpensive GPS, we relied on a map of the city to determine our route, and I have a terrible memory for directions, so I was always struggling to get anywhere on time. I was driving up the street of a neighborhood where my stop was, but I couldn't see the number. I doubled back to the start of the street and started back in the same direction. The neighborhood I was delivering to shared the street with a cemetery. One of those in-town cemeteries with no fences, just graves 10 feet off the roadway. So I pulled off the road, radio off, looking at my ticket, trying to figure out where the hell this house would be, and I start hearing this lively, whispered conversation. I couldn't make out any individual words, but it sounded like being in a quiet room with maybe a dozen people all whispering at once. It freaked me out so bad, I put my car in gear and drove off. As soon as I pulled the shifter, the voices fell silent all at once. It was so strange, and I've never experienced that again to this day. So I guess that falls into the sound category too. I forgot.
Of course.
The second one happened probably about 17 years ago. I've always been a fan of late-night drives, and my friend and I were just leaving our rural Michigan town, headed up the main street, and I saw a very pregnant woman in a nightgown standing under a tree in the yard of one of the nicer houses in town.
Uh-oh.
I looked as I passed by, and then looked in the rearview mirror once we went past, but I couldn't see her. It was weird to see anyone out at that hour, let alone standing stock still. So we whipped around at the gas station 2 or 3 houses down and went back up the road, and she was gone. I'm not saying she couldn't have run off in the time that it took us to turn around, but I'm not convinced it would have been easy for her. And the third one, so the third one, the next story, is one that I didn't remember for a long time, but upon reflection, it came flooding right back to me. The same friend and I were out on a night drive on the back roads of southwest Michigan, again, probably about 16 or 17 years ago. We had just come around the curve where you emerge from some woods and drive by a small lake with a few houses right up against the road. just as we cleared the last bit of trees, I looked up, and just a bit bigger than the moon would have been, I saw a sort of spherical object. It had at least 2 rows of lights, which blinked on one after the other, in a pattern where a single light is moving around the outside. I'm certain it wasn't just the moon. It seemed like it was super close. It had to be less than 50 or so feet above the lake. I remember slowing down, looking at it, and we both remarked how weird it was, but then we just kept on our drive and never said anything about it after that. After speaking with my coworker, I texted my friend and I asked if he remembered ever seeing something weird over Bankson Lake when we were out on a drive, and he said that he did remember something like that happening, but was kind of fuzzy on the details. And the last one happened back in September or October. My wife and I were out for a walk at around dusk. It was a nice clear evening and our neighborhood was pretty quiet. I looked into one of the yards, watching this kid haul ass to get behind a tree, then peek out from behind it, looking sneaky. So I'm thinking this kid's going to jump out and try to scare us. So I keep my eyes fixed on this tree since we've now crossed the road and are going to walk right past it. I remember thinking, I see you, kid, you're not that clever. But as we went by, I looked and continued looking at this tree, even veering off the sidewalk to get a better angle, and there was no kid. There was nothing behind this tree. I don't remember feeling unsettled by it, but it was a bit weird. So those are his 4 distinctly different stories.
Yeah, from someone who at first thought that nothing weird has ever happened in his life.
Exactly.
So goes to show that I feel this is something very common, you're right? Like, that's one of the reasons why I loathe the term paranormal, because it implies that it's something very rare that happens only to a handful of people. But actually, I feel that these sorts of happenings are more common than we think, that we dare to accept. It's just that when they happen, that is so rare, that it's so outrageous, we don't know, our brains don't know how to deal with it. And so eventually we kind of like forget them as some sort of defense mechanism, of our reality model. And that's when people say, "Oh, you remember that thing?" It's like, "Oh yeah," but you don't really dwell on it. Well, at least most people, because certainly there might be a few weirdos out there like us who get obsessed with this. Their whole lives get appended by such an event, and they might try to pursue it further and try to find some kind of like meaning out of it, and with obviously sometimes those with disastrous results. Sometimes your whole life gets just destroyed by it. That's a caveat that the people listening to this should always be mindful of. But yeah, that's a very, very interesting events.
And the whispering.
I love.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I loved how they saw the object over the lake and recognized it was really strange, and then just kind of kept going.
Yeah.
That it's such a common experience, and it goes to what you're talking about, Red Pill, with the way we just kind of like either we're coping with it. Sometimes I've had the thought that the phenomena is making us sort of subdued in a certain way. But I don't know, because sometimes I think we are the phenomena. So
yeah. Well, the to what Red Pill was saying, I think these experiences are just less common experiences. I don't think they're outside the normal. They're just not common.
Probably more common too, I think, in subtle ways. I that people aren't. I think you were saying this, Red Pill, that people don't notice it, or they become inured to it, or I don't know. I mean, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. If our culture was more accepting
Yes.
of these kind of experiences, this person would have returned back to his home, his friends, and said, "Hey, we saw this weird thing in the lake or whatever," and their friends will say, "Oh, well, you better go and talk to the shaman, at the edge of the village, and she or he will, tell you or try to help you and trying to interpret that experience for you."
Yep.
But we don't have that,
No,
I mean,
no.
The only thing that we have is like, well, you better go and talk to a shrink. And of course, most of us are hesitant to that because, the shrink might think that I'm crazy, or, they're going to say that I need to take these kind of like antidepressants or something. I don't think I want to go that route.
And even with seeing people who then turn out not to be there, I mean, that could be, again, sort of a reality slip too.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever that means, maybe if our brains are just interpreting information, we have no idea why certain information may stick around,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a kid did hide behind that tree hours earlier, and for some reason you picked up that information while you were walking along.
Sure.
Yeah. You guys all bring up something very important or interesting, and it's just the willingness to not write these things off. Because Red Pill's right. I mean, and we all know this. So we're programmed to write these things off. It's like, oh, I just must have, not noticed, or, there had to be somebody there, or people are going to call me crazy, so I'm going to forget about it anyway. But just being willing to catalog these things. And I'm probably retreading over a little bit of earlier conversation on this too, but it's such a fundamental thing to just say, okay, I'm going to make a point to remember when things don't make sense. And, I would tell anybody that listens to the show just to write those things down so you don't forget them.
Yeah.
Because, we get lost in our daily lives. We got to go to work. We got to take care of our families. We got to deal with the job, deal with where we live, all those things. And so it's easy to be like, well, that's outside of my immediate area of concern, and there's not anything I can do about it right now.
I wish I wrote a lot more stuff down for a lot longer in my life. Like as much stuff as I have written down, and even daily stuff. What's interesting is, especially as you get older, people are like, "Oh man, time just flies." And what it is you're just not remembering a lot of the stuff you're doing. And when and when you have like a daily run of, you can look and see, oh, I did this, and you're going, oh my God, a lot of stuff happened, that because it's routine or stuff like that, it doesn't seem, you have these big events, and those are the ones that stand out, and all this little stuff in between you kind of forget about. And then you're reading it, I'm reading through this stuff going, oh, that's right, that happened. I totally forgot that happened. And, you're like, wow, a lot of stuff happened. This hasn't really gone fast at all. It's just the way your memory works.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. People in this field sometimes they recommend having a dream journal, right?
At very least,
They never tell you to try to have a weird journal, like where you write down weird happenings in your life, the things that don't make sense. And maybe that's a good idea, or maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm very lazy with dream journals, I have to say. I've tried to keep it one of my last very interesting dreams I had is that I remember that I was kind of like in this situation in which I feel I was in with some kind of weird astronaut suit. But it wasn't the typical astronaut suit, because I feel instead of hands, it had some kind of claws or something like that. And I got a feeling I was going to be like the first man on the moon, or the first man on some kind of space mission. And my parents were there with me, and they were hugging me because they were very, very proud of me. And that is the reason why I guess I remember the dream, because it had this sentiment that clung into my psyche of this feeling this pride from my parents. Sometimes, I mean, I guess maybe I'm telling that sometimes my parents are not very sharing in showing their affection to me or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
But I don't know. The idea of trying to pay attention to everything that is weird, it could be interesting, but also it could be it could turn into a very strange and maybe even paranoid situation in which, for example, friends of mine, colleagues, Adam Gorightly, Greg Bishop. I just finished reading Adam Gorightly's book, Saucers, Books and Cooks, which I recommend you guys go and pick a copy, not just because it was published by Daily Grail Publishing, which is like the company that is owned by Greg Taylor, the owner of the website I contribute to. No, it's a good book by itself.
It's a great book. I say that not just because Adam's my boy, but it's a great book. And anybody who's interested, anybody who wants a really concise, this is now just an ad for it, but really, I mean, honestly, the way in which he, in a very, I think, concise but still engaging way, kind of breaks down the whole a big chunk of the American UFO narrative, particularly the stuff that's the deep underground base, the dumb stuff, Phil Schneider. It's very interesting. It all centers around this guy Tal Levesque.
Right. Yeah. But the reason what I bring it about is because in the last chapter, in probably the most personal one, Adam speaks about his journey, which through what is called often in this field chapel perilous.
Yes.
This is an idea that was brought by Robert Anton Wilson. Obviously, it wasn't originated by him. He just picked it up from esoteric writings. But the idea of going through chapel perilous is that when you get involved in this field out of curiosity, out of a deep interest in whatever, sooner or later you're going through a phase of when you meet, when you feel like how to convey this, you go into a certain headspace of deep paranoia. In which feel every single thing that happens in your life is, oh my God, this is connected to my research. They are after me, they are surveilling me, the man is after me and whatever. And everything that happens to you, just oh my God, that is not just a mere coincidence. It's all connected. The typical trope of the lunatic in the movie with the guy who has this board with all these pins, and all these lines that it kind of makes like a Jackson Pollock painting out of
what's the meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? I think there's one with Charlie. Pepe Sylvia.
Yep. Right. And you can get into that headspace very, very quickly and very easily if you're not careful. And it's not something that is actually recommendable. And actually, Adam writes this chapter as some kind of a cautionary tale for people who are interested in this field. Be mindful. Try to get into this kind of it's very kind of like a Zen kind of state of detachment of, you're interested in this stuff, but at the same time, you are in a certain level of dispassionate about it enough so that it doesn't hijack every single living moment of your life. Yeah. Because if you let that happen, you are going to go deep into the rabbit hole and you are never getting out of it.
Yeah. It's funny because it's so similar to sort of the way that Peter Carroll talks about approaching chaos magic, in sort of the seminal chaos magic books, is this idea of like indifferent interest and casting the sigil with indifferent interest, keeping you safe. It may, for efficacy too, but for efficacy, yeah.
Well, it's also the whole lust for result thing,
right? Of course,
right. Yeah, it's guys, right?
Oh, I was going to say that. I think it's useful. It was very useful for me not only to record the weird stuff and the dreams, but the normal stuff too. I mean, on a simple level of now I know when I met certain people I'm still friends with. I have a list of all the concerts I went to in the 1990s, which is kind of neat. But it also helps me see what was going on in my life around the time that the weird stuff happened. And that was something that, like I knew I was supposed to record everything, not just the weird stuff. And, once I think it was Mike Cleland was the one that alerted me to that, where he started asking, well, what was going on in your life when you saw the UFO? And I was like, I don't know, but I can look it up,
Right.
And it's like, oh, that was a massive change in my life right when I saw the UFO. Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
I'm glad you mentioned that Red Pill, because I guess about a month ago, Chris and I were on with Seriah talking to Greg, and he talked about his experience with paranoia. And it's a real trap. And I think Seriah, you putting everything in there keeps it from becoming that focus, because it's your whole life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is a good point. So I will rephrase my statement to record everything, maybe, as opposed to, so you don't get I call it itis when you get focused on something.
Yeah, and maybe technology can help you out too. Like, for example, sometimes I actually very grateful about some of the features of Google Photos. That when the app tells you, hey, do you want to remember what happened this day 5 years ago?
Right.
And you go and check these photos. Oh yeah, I was there, bro. And sometimes the photos, if you are me, sometimes you take photos that are not that meaningful. Like, not because you were in this concert, or you were in this party or this event and you were busy there, because you were taking a photo that you were using the camera to, I don't know, for me as an artistic reference that I need to use for an illustration or whatever. But maybe, just doing something like, taking one photo a day or something, something that catches your attention, like a tree or so. Maybe that will be an interesting experiment.
I tried to do that at one point. There was this girl on Flickr, Kaylee Granite, I think her name was, or something like that. Or Garrett. I think it was Garrett. And what she was doing is, like, for 365 days, she took a picture a day, and she had a really good eye for it. And, like, I found her stuff, and I was just like, this is interesting, because they weren't, a lot of them were selfies, but they weren't always, like her in attractive poses or anything. They were just everyday photos, or, like expressive photos that didn't necessarily make her look good.
Right.
But it was an interesting exercise for her, and it was interesting to look at,
Right.
Also, that guy, well, we were talking about that guy's story with the voices he heard, the conversation. Obviously, there's another audio thing, which we've already talked about. But, he associates it to pulling up by the graveyard. And maybe that was connected, or maybe that had nothing to do with it at all, but we just associate weirdness with graveyards.
Sure.
But I mean, he did pull up next to a graveyard, and he heard a bunch of voices talking really softly.
Right.
That's pretty on the nose.
Yeah. It's a natural connection to make, but that's not necessarily cause and effect.
I see what you're saying. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah.
All right. I think we have time for one more here. So this is actually the one I thought I was reading the last time when I said there's no audio in this one. So this one doesn't have any audio weirdness. This one is entitled Something Imitating Roommates and Friends, from Chelsea. And she says, in December of 2020, I left New Orleans, my home for the last 12 years, and moved to a friend's farm an hour and a half north of the city with several other people. Living quarters were tight at the beginning, and for the first 2 months I was sharing a room with a friend. Eventually, another friend moved out, and my roommate moved into the empty room at the opposite side of the house. The first incident occurred about 2 weeks after my roommate moved into his own room. My roommate had this peculiar habit of making really loud, exaggerated yawns in his sleep. It's very distinct, and I've never heard anyone else come close to making the same sound. He sounded like a freaking elephant. One night I woke up in the middle of the night facing the wall and was just about to get up and pee when from behind me I heard him yawn clear as day. Even though I knew there was no reason for him to be in my room, I turned over and looked, half expecting him to be there, but the other bed was empty. This was a rare occasion where we were the only people in the house that night, so I can't rationalize it away as simply being another roommate in the next bedroom. And to this day, I've never been able to hear a peep out of him from my room, even when both our doors are open, and he's usually very busy yawning, snoring, and talking in his sleep. The second incident occurred about 2 weeks ago. I was doing dishes, and directly in front of me, out of the kitchen window, I could see the same roommate and a friend of ours sitting at the picnic table under our magnolia tree. A minute later, I glanced over my shoulder and saw our friend sitting just a few feet away from me at the breakfast bar, looking at his phone. I turned back to look out the window, and there he was, still sitting at the tree with my roommate. I did a double take, and sure enough, there was no one sitting at the breakfast bar. There's no way he could have gotten from the kitchen back to the yard in the second it took me to turn back to the window. When I finished the dishes, I went out and asked him if he'd come inside recently, and he said he hadn't gotten up from the picnic table since he and my roommate had gone outside about a half an hour before. The most recent incident happened this afternoon and finally prompted me to email you. My roommate had just gotten home after being gone for a week. I was cleaning up the kitchen, chatting with him on and off while he unloaded the car. At one point, he came inside, walked through the kitchen, and turned down the hallway, presumably to go to the bathroom. I was headed that way to change over the laundry and very clearly saw him turn into the hallway. When I got to the dryer, I realized that the bathroom door was open and there was no one in there. Almost instantly, I heard him out front at his car laughing with one of our other roommates. The hallway is a dead end, and there's no way he could have gotten back outside without passing me. I've never been felt threatened by any of these incidents, but they definitely leave me scratching my head.
Weird.
You know, it kind of reminds me of bilocation.
Yeah.
It's the roommate doing it, not necessarily the person that's seeing it. But
right.
The other thought too is maybe they're just picking up on old information, or I don't know. The bilocation is what I kept going back to, though. I can't give you a good reason for that, though.
I feel like there was a show that Timothy did on a phenomenon that's very much like this. I'm gonna remember. Oh, it's a Scandinavian.
I did that.
Spirit, or you did it? Vardoger.
Right.
Vardoger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of. Yeah.
Yeah, because I had someone contact me about that, and she asked if I'd ever done a show on it, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. So I had her on to talk about the vardoger. Okay. And a lot of people have had that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is a name for it, and it was like from Scandinavian folklore, I think, and it was like not only
vardoger.
It could be the person, it could be like their footsteps, their voice, their scent, appearance, all those. Yeah, that's exactly.
The Scandinavian word is vardoger.
Yeah, vardoger.
Right. Well, it implies this idea of the stoned tape theory, right? There's some kind of like a memory stored in space-time that sometimes you are able to retrieve it. And one of the things that strikes me, maybe it's pertinent or not, in these accounts, is that the person who is telling them, most of the time they were doing kitchen chores, and when you're doing you're washing the dishes, well, you're not like 100% focusing on the dishes, right? You're wondering, you're like, your mind is not 100% into it,
right?
So you might even say you're dozing off, or you are
trancing out,
dozing off. So maybe there's something to that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the bilocation makes sense since it seems to be related to just this one person. You know, that maybe on another level of consciousness, he's projecting himself without realizing he's doing it. Be interesting if he could do it intentionally.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
That would be
right?
Yeah.
There's only been a few people who make that claim.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on that?
I mean, we don't know the kind of relationship the listener has with this roommate.
True.
You know, are they good friends? Do they kind of like hate each other? Maybe there's some kind of like a romantic thing going on. Well, I don't know.
Well, no, you're right though. I mean, all those things, they play into it. It's never just a phenomenon. Exactly. There's always something else that's, you know, part of it. And I think that's because they're inextricably linked with ourselves and our lives.
Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely. So, I guess we'll end the stories there. You guys want to stick around and do something for Patreon?
Sure.
All right. If people want to submit their stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you want to just come on and talk about your story, you can do that too. Just let me know. And I do suck at getting back to people. And I have to apologize right up front because, as I said at the beginning, I'll look at stuff and be like, this looks interesting. I'm going to sit down and read this later. And then I just absolutely forget about it. I have a number of people I just wrote back tonight as I was going through collecting some of these stories who wanted to come on the show. One of them, I think it's been a year that I've been going back and forth with them. And then I'm like, oh, do you still want to come on? Yeah, I still want to come on. Okay. And then I don't respond. And it's not intentional. And I'm not blowing anyone off. I have so many email accounts and so many different ways people are messaging me. It's very, very hard to keep up with. And sometimes I want to actually sit down and give the stuff my attention, and I just don't always have the time to do that. But anyway, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. General stuff is contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And you can find everything at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And you can become a patron and get tons of extra content and special stuff. Yeah, special stuff. We'll call it special stuff.
The specialist stuff.
That's good stuff.
And it's only $3 a month. So you're definitely, I hope, getting your money's worth. So, all right. So we will, and we're going to do a Patreon segment following this. We probably won't do any of the personal stories, but you know what? I have some of these old stories from the Magonia stuff. All right. So Red Pill, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me in Mexico.
Oh, all right.
They also can find me at thedailygrail.com. That is like the place where I contribute as a writer, news editor, and if you can support us on Patreon, that will be greatly appreciated. You can also find me at my personal website, absurdbydesign.com, where you can see my artwork. You can also, contact me if you are interested in me doing some kind of like artwork commission for you. And obviously, you can also find me at Where Did the Road Go?
And so you say people can find you in Mexico. Are there signs when they get to Mexico?
Right, of course. Yeah, the moment you get off the plane, there will be a guy say Red Pill Junkie, and they will take you where I.
Very nice, very nice.
Right where they stack your passport. Yeah,
exactly.
And Chris, people can find you and your films where?
You can watch a lot of short films and stuff like that at brightrectangle.com, and then a couple of my features you can rent on Amazon.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Seriously, you people are the lifeblood of this show. And I want to give a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Infra Man, Eric Hervin, Tim, The 100th Monkey Project, Ad Noctum, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andy McNamara, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Chris Ernst, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Puck Brother, Joanna Rojas, Jose A., Carla Mahoney, Kevin, Kristen L., Kevin Schreck, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Jim and Sophie, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matthew Sproul, Maddie, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sheeron, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor, 36 Dingo, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Powell, William Lovelace, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very much. All right, there were 2 Patreon segments for that show. One I already put up last week, and another that I will be putting up later this week, where we cover some old weird accounts in newspaper articles. The original airing of this show, where it first runs on WVBR, is May 15th, 2021. And that makes it almost exactly 30 years since I had that Kundalini awakening that gave me the name Seriah, and a whole bunch of other weird stuff that followed that almost immediately. And I didn't realize that. I thought this stuff was more spaced out. But in the month that followed, all kinds of strange things happened to me, some of the strangest stuff that's ever happened to me. And in writing the book about my life, I'm seeing how much these events kind of like connected and all happened in a very short period, something I didn't realize just remembering back. And that's why I say it's always so important to write this stuff down, write down what's happening in your life. It doesn't have to be in super detail if you don't want, but you may thank yourself later, because it's definitely an interesting insight to how things unfold. I may be releasing chapters of the book to Patreons, maybe just $10 and up Patreons. I'm not sure yet. But if you're a Patreon, you're probably going to get to read chunks of the book first. I'm hoping to have it done by the Strange Realities Conference that I should be appearing at in October in Nashville, run by Adam Sane and Serfiel of Conspiranormal. If it's not done by then, it'll hopefully be done before the end of the year. And a number of people have asked about a audio version, and I do plan on doing an audio version, reading the book myself, maybe putting it up on Bandcamp or something like that for people. So it'll be out as a print book, as an ebook, and as an audio version eventually. That'll probably take a little bit longer, focusing on just getting it done right now. But that event 30 years ago undoubtedly led me down the path that has led to doing this show today. And I'm really glad it did. And I'm really glad I've gotten to meet so many of you, both guests that have been on the show, co-hosts, and listeners. It's been an absolutely awesome experience, and I hope it goes on for quite a bit longer. You can become a patron at where'dtheroadgo.com. It really does help us out a lot, and I'm trying to get more shows put up. We did do 2 last week, which is the first time we've done that in a while, and I'm working on it, trying to get caught up on things and get more material out there for you people, and I want to make sure it stays interesting. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.